University professor who will tell us about some open source around the Arabic world. And we also have two special guests, Ishita Mandan and Rachel Myers, who are also both open source contributors. So briefly going on to the next slide, there are just various examples on the next slide of open source projects, of licenses. So examples of open source projects, GitHub, Jenkins, Linux, Hadoop, Spark, so Eclipse. There's a lot of open source projects. They could be tools, they could be software to help you manage other software. So that's GitHub and Jenkins, Linux and operating system. There's databases like Cassandra. There's big data processing like Hadoop and Spark. And there's examples of licenses. There's Apache license, AGPL, MIT, and there are literally tens of kinds of licenses associated with the various open source projects. And there are lots of consortia to manage open source projects. The Linux Foundation is one. There's a jQuery Foundation recently created, the Apache Software Foundation, OpenStack for cloud. There's also, I should mention that the percentage of female open source contributors is quite low, but we're very lucky today because we've got quite a number of them on this call. And also there's a lot of surveys about open source, which you can read about. We'll be hearing some from Dr. Manar, but there's also about companies and how they use open source and how they manage their open source, and there's a link there to one of the sort of surveys, which actually comes out every year about the usage of open source in corporations and big companies. Now, moving on, we're delighted to invite our first speaker, Rand Mustaheb, who's going to tell us what it's like using open source. So if we could go to the next slide and make Rand our speaker. And I was delighted to meet Rand earlier this year in Abu Dhabi at the ArabWIC conference. And over to you, Rand.
Thank you, Susan. Hello, everybody. I'm Rand Mustaheb. I'm a senior software engineer, full stack software engineer at a startup called ArabWIC. I'm also ArabWIC Jordan ambassador. Okay, let me start now with the slides. I want to start with before open source. For me, before open source, that I graduated from Yarmouk University with a bachelor in computer science in 2008. Ghida, please can you move the slides? Yeah. I graduated from Yarmouk University with a bachelor in computer science in 2008. Then I came from enterprise background. I worked as a programmer in the MIS department of an engineering consulting company called CC, Consolidated Consultants for Engineering and Environment, for 3.5 years. I was responsible in developing in-house desktop applications using Microsoft technologies like VB.NET and SQL Server to support the internal departments like HR, IT, accounting. So I was experienced in Microsoft technologies. That was before open source. Then my stairway to open source was learning PHP by myself. I decided to do that change, major change. You know, after 3.5 years, that was too much for me. Then I decided to change that path to open source. After I learned PHP by myself, I started to apply to jobs at startups to apply that experience. Then I found a job at ArabWIC I'm currently working at. I learned the first MVC framework for me was Yi to join that startup, which is a document discovery platform. We built hashtag.com product from scratch using Yi framework. Then after that, why I moved to open source technologies? Well, for me, there are 4 reasons to do that. I loved freedom. I love to be free when it comes to experimenting with technologies. You have many options and you have many things to choose from, which can suit your project requirements. The other thing was customizability. Because the code is open, anyone can take it, can tweak it to suit their needs. That was very important to me because I did that. I was able to have the code and to do my tweaks to suit my needs for the project that I'm working for. The third one was quality. What's behind the open source community are top niche developers who can contribute with high quality softwares, and that defeats the definition that free stuff are not that quality. So open source community has the quality stuff now. The fourth one was innovation. Open source definitely empowers people to innovate. If you have an idea, you have the technology, and you can do that at lower prices. And that really empowers people to innovate more. The last thing, how do I use open source technologies? For me, the current thing that I'm working at using Ruby on Rails, I'm proficient in Ruby on Rails. I use sometimes Sphinx as a search server. For JavaScript, I use jQuery library. I use Apache and Nginx. It depends. For static pages, I use Nginx, Apache for application servers, Passenger for deploying Ruby, for example. I use as editors Vim and Tmux for multiplexer, terminal multiplexer, for of course Ubuntu as a server. And I use DevOps to manage the recipes of when deploying the servers using Chef. So these are some of the technologies that I use with my current job. Thanks for this awesome opportunity. I'm done with my presentation. If there are questions, please, you can ask me after that. I'm done, Ghida, Susan.
Am I on now? This is Susan. Can you hear me?
I can hear you.
Okay, great. Well, thank you very much, Rand. That was very nice. I'll just ask you one brief question before we move. Oh no, maybe it's too hard to do that. We'll do all the Q&A at the end because of who's speaking when. Okay, so now delighted to introduce Aya Mahfouz, who I have not met, but came across her because on the internet because she works on the Linux kernel, and I thought it would be a wonderful opportunity to have someone on this call who's from the region, who works in that environment. Over to you, Aya.
So, hello everyone. I would like to thank my colleagues for introducing the concept of open source and discussing the benefits of using open source software. My name is Aya Mahfouz and I contribute to the Linux kernel. I'll be speaking now about how to contribute to open source software in general. Next, please. Next. So, why I contribute to open source was actually a story. I used to be a teaching assistant. And after leaving the job, I wanted to explore the different possibilities where one can follow his or her passion. One of the options was finding interesting open source projects to contribute to. And I wanted to find like this flowing stream in my head where I can find ideas and, let's say, connect to people. So I started with open source software. I wanted to start to contribute to the Linux kernel because it involves many of the things I love about computer science, like data structures, algorithms, distributed systems, operating systems, networks, etc., etc. Since I was a bit lost and I was afraid from the community of the Linux kernel, I started from what it seemed to be a safe place, which is the Outreachy initiative. I applied for rounds 9 and 10, and I was actually accepted in round number 10, where I should, how to say this, where I should update a driver to use newer APIs. And I have just finished my internship, and I have 100+ patches accepted to the Linux kernel now. And not to mention that in between rounds 9 and 10, I gave a workshop to the last class I used to teach when I was a teaching assistant, and the experience with the students was really different and liberating than being a teaching assistant in, let's say, a contained course. I'm hoping to continue to, let's say, follow the flow in my head and discover new hidden gems along the way while interacting with people and discovering new open source projects. And I'm hoping this is the start of a new journey. Next, please. So now back to the audience and why you should contribute to open source. Open source software thrives on a community that builds and uses it. So if you're a big fan of a given framework or utility, consider contributing to it to keep it alive. It's also a good place to find something of interest to you and that helps you follow your own passion and keep your inner geek happy. And it's also one of the best places to learn and apply many theoretical concepts in addition to gaining experience. One of the best places to build reputation for oneself is actually open source, because you garner attention from companies and from interested organizations in hiring talent. And since all your contributions online, there's a very high chance of you catching the attention of someone as a possible candidate for a job related to your contributions. Or even better, if you are really good, you can be a maintainer and be maybe a leader of a component in a highly acclaimed open source project, while leading others too. In general, open source is a good place to find like-minded people and have friends from different cultures. I would like to say that during the application phase and the internship phase of Outreach, I have interacted with at least 10 nationalities. Always know that open source is always started by amateurs, and it helps them connect to people with similar needs. And according to Coverty, a company that provides static analysis of code commercially, more than 80% of closed source projects that they analyze are actually based on open source counterparts. So go figure. Now, how you should contribute to open source software. Look for projects of interest and subscribe to their mailing lists while keeping an eye on the community pages too. This will help you find out what are the community or what the community is looking for and what they are concerned with right now. Many RFCs are usually posted on the mailing lists, and in some projects there are wiki pages dedicated to new features and modules. Next, you need to check how contributions are made and accepted. Check the used programming languages, version control systems, and how patches or changes made to the software are accepted. In the Linux kernel, for example, they use Git for version control, and all the patches are submitted by email where maintainers will pick them up if they're good enough to be integrated into the kernel tree. Another open source project like MediaWiki uses Fabricator for reporting bugs and requesting features, and then the patch is uploaded to Ghida, a code review tool, for review and testing before integrating it into the source tree, which also uses Git. Always start small to get familiar with the community and see what the community is expecting from you, and avoid frustrations as much as possible. Read lots of documentation to know how to handle pitfalls that you will fall into, and if you would like to ask the community about something, assert the fact that you read documents before coming to help. Next, please. There are also many initiatives out there that target underrepresented groups and or students. For example, Outreach offers 3 months internships twice per year for underrepresented groups. And for your information, they will start handling applications or opening applications for people on round 11 on September 29. There is also Google Summer of Code for undergrad and graduate university students. Application opens around Feb every year. There is also Rails Girls Summer of Code that opens in March every year for teams to join, open source projects of choice. You don't have to be a girl or a woman to join, but priority is always given to underrepresented groups. There are also some Linux kernel-specific initiatives where the Linux Foundation provides scholarships for people to get into certain tracks like system administration or kernel development to enhance their skills. And if you're interested in doing something in your own for the Linux kernel, there is also the Little Penguin or the Udiptula challenge. And as in the previous slide, feel free to start on your own. Always take initiative and do things that you like. Next. At the end of the day, I would like to thank you all for listening. You can reach me at the provided email, and please ask all of us as much as you can when it's time to post questions, all the images used were from Wikimedia Commons and employ versions 2 and 4 of the Creative Commons Attribution Shared Alike license. Thank you, everyone, and back to Susan again.
Thank you very much, Aya, for the great talk. And I should mention, I think Aya is going to a conference very soon, which has to do with Linux. And indeed, I'm going to an open source conference next week as well. I specialize in data, and there's a conference next week on Apache Big Data. So that's all the many open source projects to do with Hadoop, Spark. There are literally tens, if not hundreds, of Apache projects which now relate to data. So it's a very active community, Linux operating system and data and databases. Now, are there any questions in the chat, or should we just move on at this point? Please do ask questions, by the way, in the audience, in the chat, because we can, as we're speaking, we can see the chat and we can respond to any questions as we go along. Now we'll hand over to Dr. Manar, and she will tell us about activities in open source through the Arabic world. So over to you, Dr. Manar, who I also had the very good fortune to meet in the event in NYU Abu Dhabi earlier this year.
Hello everyone. Thank you, Suzanne and Ghida, for organizing this. Thanks, Aya and Rand. What you have just said is just confirming to the results I have collected in my survey. So basically, I will start with the next slide that shows the literature survey that I just read for the Arabic word. So as you can see, I picked up 7 countries, but we have so many countries in, that have very valuable initiatives and efforts towards the open source movement. So of course, I have to mention that the efforts that's done in developed countries is much more than the developing countries, but there are very high awareness in all over the Arab world. So if we just go to Tunisia, we will see that we have started a big awareness in 2001. And if you see all the countries, actually, a big awareness has happened in 2000 and up to 2015. So in Tunisia, they took the lead, and they had in 2012 the first center for open source software in the Arab world that leads all the Arabic efforts for all the countries in the Middle East. In Egypt, they did a good job in the last 5 years. Starting from 2010, it was also a group of professors who did studies in the University of Cairo, and then they were able to publish a study that was valuable, and that was also shared.
Dr. Manar, could you go nearer the microphone?
Can you hear me?
I think it would be a bit better if you go nearer the microphone.
Okay, my voice is far.
Yeah, now it's good. Now it's good.
And now, okay, good.
Okay, yes, a bit slower near the microphone. That would be great.
Okay, thanks, Susan. So in Egypt, after that nice study that they did, they shared with the government, and by 2014, they launched a strategy initiated by the Ministry of Communication and IT. They have similar nice efforts that has been done in the last 7 years, that was started officially by the ministry towards the open source, and then in that same year they established Jordan Open Source Association. In 2010 they signed an MOU with one of the biggest companies that support for open source increased, and in 2015 he hosted the first conference in the open source. In Oman, its efforts, activities and initiatives, they were also doing national programs and policies. So actually, they were active in the last 5 years. So they were launching two national programs, one for the youth and one for the initiatives to be done by the ministries and the government. And in the last 2 years, they hosted two conferences, and they are doing this conference biannually. In Qatar, they are doing less efforts, but still they are trying to raise the awareness about the open source. In Saudi Arabia, they already launched a national program in 2013. Were located trying to do similar study that has been done in Saudi Arabia, and I will be sharing the results in the next slide. Next slide.
I don't hear Dr. Manar at all now.
Okay, now it's good?
Yes, now it's good, but we didn't hear like a couple of minutes at all.
Oh, okay. I wonder why I'm too close to the mic, so I hope now it's okay. Okay, so in this slide, you will see that I tried to do a similar study that has been done by King Abdulaziz Institute for Science and Technology, and we got similar survey results. And if you can see that the top 3 reasons or how they have heard about the open source software, you will see that most of them they have heard it about by trial and error through online resources and tutorials and through online user group. Unfortunately, in both countries, they don't have high membership in online open source software user groups. That's around 30%. In one of the questions of the surveys, we also asked them if the participants have heard about the initiatives, if the country have already a clear vision about the open source software. There is a small percentage who are firm about the initiatives of the country in UAE and Saudi Arabia. I can say 33% agree that, okay, they would know through the organization that they belong to or through the community groups that they belong to in the country. Next slide. Next slide, Ghida. The one before. Continuing with the same survey, we confirmed what Trent has said and what Aya has said. The top 3 reasons of why people they move or they would prefer open source software over the commercial ones. It's because of the cost, because it's easy to use, and it's not controlled by license. And according to the challenges and why some of the participants they hesitate using the open source software, we follow the top 2 challenges in both countries are little technical support and it requires a training. Basically, next slide, Ghida. Basically, the studies show similar results, and my literature survey, according to the Arab world that I conduct and I have seen in all Arabic countries, that we have several initiatives, we have several national programs and policies, and the government encourage the movement towards open source software. But unfortunately, we still lack the resources. We don't have a clear or approachable documentation to show the national program. So we still need researchers and software practitioners to spend more efforts in that field in order to explore some of the software vendors to see the valuable use of these software in several sectors. When I surveyed through the conferences and the publications, I found out that a high percentage of these research results have been really in higher education. So most of the results has been published And a big amount of them is covering how to deploy the open source software in the higher education, since building IT infrastructure is very costly and expensive in the higher education and in the universities and schools.
Dr. Manar, can you go back near the microphone and speak more slowly?
Yes.
Okay.
In the conferences and publications, I found out after surveying more than 100 publications, especially to the conferences that has been hosted by the Arabic countries and the conferences outside, there is a small percentage, 25%, about talking about the open source initiatives in the Arab world. So basically, we really need some researchers to devote more time and efforts in the field of the open source software. We do have some valuable research and some rich studies, but we can devote even more in that area, especially recently that they are hosting some Arabic countries conferences such as in Oman and in Jordan. Next slide. When I look to the group bands and let's say enthusiastic about the open source software, I was impressed to see that there are several groups related to the Linux, to digital free software associations in several Arabic countries in Tunisia and in Jordan. Also for the Linux groups in Egypt, Jordan, Palestine, Lebanon, Qatar and Kuwait, and the open source communities that are in UAE, Kuwait, Bahrain, Lebanon and Palestine. But when I looked how active they are and how they tweet their news and how they engage in the community outside, I found them not that much active like in the developed countries. And this is one picture of the discussion that has happened during the year, and you can see that the involvement of the Arabic countries is not that much high. But hopefully having all of these big number of groups, maybe it's coming in the next years. Next slide. So I wanted to share some successful case studies that I have been through in the United Arab Emirates. I have been working with the IT team, with the IT director in Al Hussein University, and as I said, the IT infrastructure to be built in the universities in the United Arab Emirates is very expensive and costly. This is around 3 million dirhams, which around $1 million. So we tried to study, and we have involved a complete open source platform that's including the software, the license, the upgrades, the support, and the tools, and we cut down the expenses in significant amount that we just needed the technical support, which is around 30,000 dirhams. Next slide. I have been also contacted by UNESCO so that we can get involved, me with my group, to translate some of the open source software from English user interface to Arabic. So there is a big room of contribution for the Arab world where we can contribute in the open source movement by translation, by having all the useful open source software to have an Arabic user interface. And I have been involved in this project, which is iHiris, which is for the open source tools for managing and supporting health workers. Next slide. I have been also an invited speaker for an IT problem that has happened for the social science research in the United Arab Emirates. So the Presidential Affairs Ministry have communicated with me, and they told me how we would propose a solution for social science researchers who have a lack of communication, that sometimes they could duplicate the work, and we know that social science is the backbone of the country, and we need to update all the research all up to the date for researchers so that they can see their work in all universities in the country. So after hearing from several professors in that field, in that forum, they all suffer that they don't know about each other research. Sometimes they could duplicate the work. Sometimes they are not communicating very well. They don't have a central repository. So I tried to introduce for them a data first network, which is an open source software that has been used by Institute of Social Science in Harvard, and I was explaining to them how it works and how it functions and how even it is the collecting data, the statistical analysis tool, the communication and having central repository for researchers, plus the citation, and it will take all the hectic things that the social science researchers facing as a challenging, that we can use it through this open source platform. Next slide, please. So there is a nice initiative from Europe that they built a commission or consortium where they would love to have publish and analyze a larger scale of database with the open source software and to evaluate them and to validate them in order to have it available to whoever is interested and to not waste their time searching and finding. I would love to give two examples from these for the Arab people who can invest their time in research, and for software engineers in the Arab world that they can use open source software in two directions. So one direction is, since open source software is becoming now very popular and famous, so we can study all the factors that makes it very successful. One publication has been published in the modularity of the open source software. So since the code is open and they can discuss how modular it is and how the object-oriented is working in that movement and why it is successful. So it could be lessons learned for software engineers. In the other direction as well, we can use, since the open source is coding that you can access and you can look at, we can use many in the software engineering, the software quality metrics, to validate these metrics on that code, which is, it's open, and we can use it to validate so many metrics that's available in software engineering that still needs validation and verification. So basically we can use open source software in several types in order to validate this type of metrics. Next slide. So that's for all. That's my email. In case if you got interested, we are doing initiatives in the United Arab Emirates, and we collecting, trying to do now in the future the digital forensics. So we hope to get some people working and interested in the projects that I have mentioned, plus the future projects in the law enforcement in the United Arab Emirates. Thank you all for listening.
Thank you so much, Dr. Manar, and you became extremely clear towards the end.
I don't know what was the reason, but it's good that it was working at the end. Thank you so much.
It was wonderful, yes, and it's very exciting, all these results and ideas for future activities. I was wondering if we could unmute one or two people in the audience who may want to say a few words. Can we unmute Ishita Mandan? Is that possible? I don't know if Rachel wants to say a few words, whether she can be unmuted at some point. And we're putting questions in the chat, so you can also note things in the chat and ask questions there. So who's that speaking now?
That's Ishita. Hi, Susan. Can you hear me?
Yes, very clearly. Yes. Perfect. So would you like to say a few words about your open source experiences and what you contribute to?
Sure, definitely. So I recently graduated in May and started working with IBM in the open source community development team. And so I've been working on Trove, which is an open source database as a service on the OpenStack platform. And I think it's definitely intimidating getting into it at first, but there's a lot of avenues to ask questions, get a lot of your questions answered, and the people are super helpful. There's IRC channels where you can ask a lot of questions, meet different people, and you don't necessarily have to ask large groups. You can even talk to specific people. The mailing list definitely give you a good idea of whatever is happening in the community and keeps you up to date. So there's a lot of different ways to get started, but definitely reading and asking questions is a good way to get started. And I think there's a lot of benefits to when you work on it too. But yeah, that's my little blurb. If anyone has questions, feel free to ask me.
Yeah, and people, please, the attendees, please just put questions in the chat because we can handle them that way as well. So a point to mention about contributing to open source, it's very much about building up your own reputation. It is a personal thing. It's you as a person, how you how people perceive you, how good you are at fixing defects. You gradually move up to do bigger and bigger activities as the community gets to know you and respect you. And I think Aya also talked a little bit about that.
Yeah, I'm getting started with just reviewing bugs and reviewing everyone else's code gets your name out there. It lets people know you're working on it. You're trying to understand and be part of the community, and then picking up small bug fixes usually helps get out there too. And eventually, I think getting to blueprints and new features and adding major things.
Yes, thank you, Ishita. I don't know if Rachel wants to say a few words. Rachel, are you on?
I am here.
Oh, great. So tell us about what you do.
Okay, so I'm an engineer at GitHub. I work on the new user experience team right now. When I first joined, I've been there for about 2.5 years. So before I joined this team, I worked on a collaborative email client that we used internally for sales and for support. And on the new user experience team now, my main job is to try to make GitHub the most welcoming place possible for everyone. So please send me all of your feature requests. And then in terms of open source, I have two main projects. The first one is GitHub has made an editor called Atom, and one of the things that I'm doing, like in my open source time, we have open source Fridays at GitHub. So one of the things I do with my open source time at work is try to debug what the experience is like for Atom on ARM processors. ARM processors are the fairly inexpensive processors as opposed to Intel, which is pretty expensive. And the idea is if we can get a great development environment running on low cost like hardware, then who is allowed to become a developer vastly increases. So making the world a little bit easier for people to get started. In my free time, so that's like my work open source project. And in my free time, my open source project is RailsBridge, which so we maintain a lot of software, including installation instructions and curriculum to learn a lot of different technologies. So we do mostly Rails, but we also have a curriculum for Go, for Clojure, for JavaScript. So that takes up a lot of time on my weekends.
So open source weekends as well.
Yeah, exactly.
Yes, one finds that people who work on open source, it becomes a personal interest, and they work on it at all times. And it's great. We've heard such a variety of open source projects, from cloud computing, from Ishita, from operating system, from Aya, from editors, and open source code management, also from Rachel. So quite a variety, and it just shows you how prevalent open source software has become. Touches every part of computing and software engineering. Are there any questions in the chat? Or anyone want to ask anything? Or one speaker can ask another speaker a question. I don't see anything in the chat. At one point, I saw Rita Abdullah put her hand up for a question, but I think it's gone away now. Okay, Aya has a question. Aya, do you want to write it in the chat, or do you want to be unmuted? Maybe we can unmute Aya. I think I've unmuted you, Aya. Go ahead.
Yes, I have a question for Rachel, actually. So she spoke about trying to move away from Intel processors. So is there a movement inside GitHub to use open source hardware? Like, could she elaborate more on that?
So it's not necessarily a project to move away from Intel for what we're running our company on, but in terms of supporting all devices, because the motivation from this comes from GitHub being in many ways a gateway to open source and learning to code in general. And so if we can make it more accessible, then if we can make it accessible on more devices, then we've broadened like the pool of people that can contribute. So it's not necessarily that our servers will be ARM machines. It's that we want the Atom experience to be great on all devices. Does that make sense?
Yes, it makes sense, Rachel. Thank you very much for this.
Awesome.
I think Ashwag has a question. Ashwag, would you like to be unmuted? Can please someone unmute Ashwag Al-Asmari?
I've unmuted Ashwag.
Yeah, Ashwag, please.
Hello, everyone. How are you? This is Ashwag Al-Asmari. Actually, I don't know if you hear me very well.
Very, very clearly.
Cool. So my question to Dr. Manar about her participation in our conference in 2012, I think. So she mentioned that there is a lack of communication among researchers in Arab world. So I'm wondering about nowadays.
Thank you, Ashwa, for the question, for raising up the question. Yes, we still have the same problem because I tried to deliver my awareness to the audience, and they took it as a list of recommendations. So they put it down in 2012, and I already published a journal about this.
I'm sorry, actually I can't hear you very well, so your voice is breaking up.
Okay. Okay, yeah. So in 2012, they listed my solution in the recommendation in the forum, and I published a journal about how we can do it. And we worked at that time with Ankabut. Ankabut is initiative, educational initiative in the UAE for universities and higher education and e-learning platforms. So basically, we did it working, and we installed the platform. But the problem in the Arab countries is that they took the initiative and they get excited about it, but then you want to try to change the mindset for the researchers. So when we went inside some of the universities so that we tried the software, many of the social science researchers, they face the problems of using latest technology. So they cannot work except with the software with the statistics. So to ask them to change and to put their work, so there's two other type of challenges. Themselves, they don't like to share their work with others. This is one. And another thing is the IT skills that they have. So many of them, they still they use the manual way that for getting the papers, even from outside conferences, it's just through attending the conferences, having the CD from someone who attended the conference and has the papers inside the CD so that they can look at it. Plus the language, because the social science for the Arab world is different from outside. So usually it's written in Arabic, so sometimes the resources are so sometimes we propose the solution and we give the platform, they get excited about it, but did they actually use it? They didn't use it. Although it is there, now it is in Ankabut, which is accessible to all universities. So it is more changing the mindset.
Dr. Manar, we can't hear you. Can you just write a few words in the chat because we really cannot hear you very well. So
okay. I don't know what is the problem. Okay, I will write. No problem.
Oh, okay, thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Manar. Also, it would be great to share the journal article you just mentioned in the beginning. Also, the materials and everything.
Yes, sure.
Thank you.
That would be great. And also, we have a question from Fatma for Rachel, but it looks like Rachel has left the meeting, so we can't ask her, unfortunately. Maybe we can do that afterwards. Any more questions from anyone? It looks like we're done in that case. So I'm going to hand over to you, Ghida.
Yes, thank you everyone for joining. Thank you, Suzanne, for moderating this. Thank you, Fatima, for helping me in preparing this, and also Diane. And thanks for the amazing 3 speakers that we had today for their slides and their preparation with us. And thanks for the attendees. We hope to see you or to have you online in future ArabWIC talks, and we promise you that we are going to have many exciting talks to come with better. This was a very good material, but we are also aim at more diversified material and interesting material for all of you. Thank you for joining and have a good evening or day. Bye.